The night when everything changed was in November. Mirabelle was 16. It was a family gathering, nothing special, just a Saturday night dinner at her grandparents' house, the kind of evening they had shared hundreds of times. It looked, from the outside, like every other night. But somewhere in that house, in a moment when Mirabelle found herself alone, something happened that crossed a line she had never thought would be crossed. That night,
you are about to hear one of the craziest cases ever. A 10-year sexual assault case. Wow. Man, these uncles are something else, right? Now, this is a story about two ebony uncles sexually assaulted their white niece. Please note that this channel doesn't support racism, right? We are not racist here, of course. You can see me. Now, this is actually what happened, and I am here to just cover the case. It's as simple as that, right? Now, sit tight because we're going to be listening together, and on intervals, I'll be sharing my opinions. So let's dive right into it.
Mirabelle was 21 years old when she finally said the words out loud. She had been holding them inside for almost a decade. She wasn't in a courtroom, she wasn't in a therapy office. She was sitting at a kitchen table, her best friend's kitchen table, with a cup of coffee she hadn't touched, shaking so badly that she had to hold her own hands to stop them. And she looked up, and she said it, quietly, barely above a whisper, but she said it. The room went completely silent, because the men she was talking about, the men she was accusing, were her uncles. Adam and Grimes, her mother's brothers, the men who were at every birthday, every holiday, every family dinner, every memory she had ever made. Think about that for a second. Imagine having something stolen from you, not your wallet, not your car, but your childhood, your sense of safety, your ability to trust. And then imagine spending years watching the people who stole it from you sit at the same table as you, laugh with your parents, hold your cousins, act like everything was fine, because that is what Mirabelle lived with for years. But here's what I need you to understand. This did not start overnight. It never does. It started years earlier, in a house full of laughter, in a family that looked from the outside like everything a family should be.
Before we dive deeper, right, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. Stories like this deserve to be told. They deserve to be heard, right? And I really want to know how far this particular case travels. So let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Let's dive right into it.
Now, let's go back to the beginning. The Whitfield family lived in Columbus, Ohio, a wide, green suburb just east of the city, where the neighbors waved to each other in the mornings, and the block smelled like cut grass and barbecue every single summer weekend. It was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked, where kids rode bikes until the streetlights came on, where everybody knew everybody, and that felt like a blessing, not a risk. Diane Whitfield was the heart of the family. She was the kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthday without writing it down, who kept a guest room made up and ready at all times, just in case someone needed a place to stay. She had married her husband, Robert, right out of college, a quiet, steady man who worked in logistics and coached Little League on Saturdays. Together, they had Mirabelle in the summer of 1999, and from the moment that little girl came home from the hospital, wrapped in a yellow blanket, the whole family fell in love with her. And when we say the whole family, we mean the whole family. Diane's brothers came to visit almost every weekend, Adam and Grimes. Adam was the older of the two. He was 42 when Mirabelle was born, tall, broad-shouldered, with an easy smile that made strangers feel like old friends within minutes. Adam could sell anything to anyone. He could walk into a room of strangers and walk out with 3 new best friends and a dinner invitation. People loved him, genuinely loved him. He was generous with his money, generous with his time, and always always the loudest laugh in the room. Grimes was the quieter one, 3 years younger than Adam, 39 when Mirabelle was born. Where Adam was fire, Grimes was water. He was the one who fixed things around the house, who remembered to ask about your knee surgery or your job interview weeks later. He wasn't loud, but he was present. He paid attention. And in a world where a lot of people are talking, a man who listens feels like something rare, something safe. Growing up, Mirabelle adored both of them. She called them Uncle A and Uncle G. Every Thanksgiving they were there. Every Christmas morning, every 4th of July barbecue in the backyard where Robert grilled too many hot dogs and Diane made potato salad that the whole neighborhood raved about. The Whitfield family had a joke they told every year. If you want to find us, just follow the smell of the potato salad. It always got a laugh. It always felt warm. There are photographs from those years, hundreds of them, showing a little girl growing up surrounded by people who seemed to love her completely. A little girl grinning, gap-toothed and sunburnt, sitting on their uncle's shoulders, running through sprinklers while they clapped, opening Christmas presents while they watched with pride. Looking at those photographs now, it is almost impossible to reconcile what they show with what was quietly beginning. Looking back, the signs were there. No one wanted to see them, and in a family built on trust, who would even think to look? There is a word that gets used a lot in cases like this one, a word that a lot of people think they understand, but most people don't. Not really. Not until they're sitting with a story like Mirabelle's, trying to piece together how a little girl grew up surrounded by family, surrounded by people who said they loved her, and still ended up so utterly unprotected. That word is grooming. Grooming is not one moment. It is not one incident. It is a slow, patient, deliberate process. It is the construction of trust in the child and in everyone around the child over months or years. It is the careful management of relationships, of perception, of opportunity. And the most important thing to understand about grooming is this: it does not look like a threat. It looks like love. It looks like attention. It looks like everything a child could want from an adult who cares about them. When Mirabelle was around 9 years old, things began to shift. Not dramatically, not in any way that anyone outside the situation would have noticed. It was subtle, the kind of subtle that only makes sense in hindsight, when you're forced to lay every memory out in front of you and look at the pattern they make together. Adam started giving her advice, just the two of them, private conversations about school, about her friends, about growing up. He had a way of making her feel like the most important person in the room. "You're different from other kids," he used to tell her. "You think deeper. You feel more. Most kids your age don't understand the things you understand." She was 9, 10, 11, and she drank those words like water, because what child wouldn't? What child at that age doesn't want to be told that they are special, that they are seen, that somewhere in the sea of ordinary people there is someone who recognizes something extraordinary in them? Grimes played a different role. Where Adam was building Mirabelle up, Grimes was positioning himself as her protector. When she got into arguments with other cousins at family gatherings, which children do because children argue, Grimes would step in on her side, always, regardless of who was right. He defended her in a way that felt fierce, almost parental. It made her feel safe. It made her feel like no matter what happened, Grimes had her back. And that feeling of having a protector is one of the most powerful feelings a child can experience, especially when the world outside feels uncertain and complicated. Diane and Robert noticed none of this. Why would they? From where they were standing, their brothers loved their daughter. Their daughter loved their uncles. This was a family that was close. This was what they had worked for. This was healthy. This was good. And that layer of parental blindness, not from neglect but from absolute trust, is precisely what made it possible for what was happening to continue. Research tells us that in the vast majority of documented grooming cases, the people closest to the child are also groomed. The predator does not just build trust with with the child. They build trust with the entire family. They become indispensable. They become beloved. They make themselves so woven into the fabric of the household that the idea of suspecting them becomes genuinely unthinkable.
Adam and Grimes did not seem like threats. They seemed like blessings. And that was exactly the point. By the time Mirabelle was 12, the favoritism had become so normalized that nobody blinked at it. Adam would bring her gifts, nothing extravagant, nothing alarming, just thoughtful. A book, he said, reminded of her. A bracelet he saw at craft fair. A card with a long handwritten message inside, telling her how proud he was of who she was becoming. These things felt beautiful at the time. They felt like the gestures of a loving uncle who happened to understand her niece on a level that her parents sometimes couldn't. And that gap, that small but real distance between a 12-year-old girl and her parents was something Adam had been quietly encouraging for months. Small comments, planted like seeds. Your parents are great, but they don't always get you, do they? Followed by a laugh, so it sounded like a joke. Followed by, but I do. You can always talk to me. He was not creating a wall between Mirabelle and her parents. He was creating a door, a private door, one that only he held the key to. And every time Mirabelle walked through it, she walked a little further away from the people who could have protected her. They said she was mature, different, special, and she believed them, because she was a child, and children believe the adults who love them. That is not a flaw, that is innocence, and it was being used against her.
Let me ask you a question. If this was your family, this was your cousin, this was your uncle, your relative, would you have seen the signs? Most people who look back at cases like this, they'll be like, I saw the signs, I saw the clues, but I thought it was love. I thought it was genuine care. Right? So let me know in the comments, if you were in Mirabelle's shoes, would you have seen the signs? Remember, she was 9, she was 10, 11, 12. The grooming didn't just start one day. Right? So let me know in the comments. Let's continue. Let's continue this case.
By the time Mirabelle turned 13, something had changed. She couldn't name it at first. She couldn't put it into words. It was more of a feeling, the way you can sometimes feel a shift in the weather before you can see it in the sky. Something was different, something was heavier, and she didn't know what to do with that feeling because everything on the surface still looked the same. Same family dinners, same birthdays, same Uncle A cracking jokes, same Uncle G fixing the fence. But the jokes had started to have an edge to them. Comments about how she looked, delivered with a laugh, so that if she reacted, she was the one being sensitive. She was the one who couldn't take a joke. She was the one making it weird. This is one of the most consistently documented tactics in psychological manipulation, the use of humor as a delivery mechanism for boundary crossing. A comment that would be clearly inappropriate on its own becomes deniable when it's wrapped in laughter. When the whole table is laughing and you're the only one who feels uncomfortable, the natural human response is to question yourself. Am I overreacting? Is this normal? Is it just a joke? And when you are 13 years old and the person making the comment is a grown adult you have trusted your entire life and everyone around you is laughing, the answer you land on is almost always, it must be me. Mirabelle started finding reasons to avoid certain moments. She would volunteer to help her mother in the kitchen when she normally would have been in the living room with the rest of the family. She started sitting between her parents at dinner instead of next to her uncles like she used to. Small adjustments, invisible to everyone else, but instinctive, the way a body tries to protect itself before the mind fully catches up. Mirabelle noticed. He always noticed, and his response was not to give her space. His response was to double down on the closeness, to manufacture moments of one-on-one time that felt natural because they had been natural for years, offering to drive her home from family events, suggesting they go get ice cream while the adults were talking, pulling her aside to ask how she was doing, his voice low and warm and concerned. And in those moments, in that private space they had built together over years of careful construction, the conversation would go places that left her confused and unsettled long after she got home. She felt uncomfortable, but she doubted herself. Maybe I'm overreacting, she thought. He's been so good to me. He's family. He loves me. That self-doubt, that was not an accident. It was the result of years of preparation. That was exactly what they wanted. Grimes, meanwhile, was doing something equally damaging in a quieter way. He was reinforcing Mirabelle's isolation from her parents, not aggressively, carefully. When she would mention something that bothered her about something her mother said, Grimes would nod slowly, like a man who understood. Your mom doesn't always get it, but I get it. When she mentioned something that made her feel misunderstood, Grimes was there to validate it, to widen it, to make the gulf between a teenage girl and her parents feel bigger and more permanent than it actually was. Because a girl who feels misunderstood at home has nowhere else to go, except to the people who tell her that they understand her. She was 14, then 15. The confusion was constant, because nothing was happening in a way that had a clear name. There was no single moment she could point to and say, this is wrong, this is abuse. It was 1,000 small moments, a hand that stayed too long, a comment wrapped in a laugh, a private conversation that left her feeling like she needed a shower but couldn't explain why. And every time she tried to organize these feelings into something she could act on, the years of grooming came rushing in to scramble the signal. He's been so good to you. He loves you. You're being dramatic. You're going to tear this family apart over nothing. She was 15 years old, carrying something no child should ever have to carry, and she was carrying it alone. The night when everything changed was in November. Mirabelle was 16. It was a family gathering, nothing special, just a Saturday night dinner at her grandparents' house, the kind of evening they had shared hundreds of times. The smell of pot roast from the kitchen, football on the TV in the den, her cousins arguing about something, her parents laughing about something her grandmother had said. It looked, from the outside, like every other night. But somewhere in that house, in a moment when Mirabelle found herself alone, something happened that crossed a line she had never thought would be crossed. That night, she stopped feeling safe. We are not going to give you graphic details. That is not what this story is about. What we will tell you is what Mirabelle herself later described in her own words. She said, "No," clearly, unmistakably, and what happened afterwards was that the person who heard that word acted as though she had said nothing. She said no, and they ignored it, as if the word had never left her mouth, as if she had never spoken at all, as if she was not even a person whose words carried any weight. Afterwards, she sat in the car on the way home from her grandparents' house, while her parents talked in the front seat about nothing, about whether the pot roast was dry, about whether they should stop for gas now or in the morning, and she stared out the window at the highway lights and felt like she was watching her own life from the outside, like she had somehow left her own body and was floating somewhere above the car, looking down at a girl who was no longer the same person she had been that morning. The radio was playing something soft, a country song she would never be able to listen to again without feeling sick. She didn't cry that night. She would later say that was the thing that scared her most, that she felt nothing. Not sadness, not rage, just a flat, cold emptiness, like someone had reached inside her chest and removed something essential. She went to her room, she sat on the edge of her bed, she stared at the wall.
And at some point, without fully deciding to, she fell asleep. The next day, Adam sent her a text message, a meme, a funny meme, the kind he always sent, like nothing had happened, like absolutely nothing had happened. And that was when the shock set in. Not the shock of what had happened, she was still too numb for that. The shock of realizing that the person who had done this to her was going to keep living his life, going to keep showing up at family dinners, going to keep sending memes and laughing too loudly and putting his arm around her mother at Christmas, and nobody was going to know, because she had no idea how to make them know. She had no idea what telling the truth would even look like, much less what it would cost. In the weeks that followed, the dissociation deepened. She moved through school like a ghost. Her grades, which had always been strong, started to slip. Her best friend at the time, a girl named Cassie who she had known since 5th grade, noticed something was wrong, but couldn't get past the wall Mirabelle had built almost overnight. "You okay?" Cassie would ask. "Yeah," Mirabelle would answer, "just tired." And Cassie, who was 16 and had no framework for what her friend might actually be going through, would accept it. Because what else do you do when someone says they're fine? She stopped eating lunch at school. She stopped answering texts. She flinched when her father hugged her and then spent hours feeling guilty about it, because none of this was his fault. None of this was her parents' fault. But her body didn't know the difference anymore. Her body had learned that people who said they loved you could not be trusted, and it responded accordingly. The hardest part, and Mirabelle would later say this in her own words, was the shame. Not the shame of what had been done to her, but the shame she had somehow already begun to carry as her own. The grooming had done its job so thoroughly that even now, even in the aftermath of something she had done nothing to cause, her first instinct was to believe that she had somehow brought it on herself, that she was responsible, that if she told anyone, they would see it that way too. I want to stop here for a moment, because if you are watching this and any part of Mirabelle's story resonates with you, if any part of what she was feeling feels familiar, I want you to hear something clearly. What happened to her was not her fault. Not the grooming, not the manipulation, not what happened that night, none of it. And the shame she was carrying, it was never hers to begin with. It was placed on her by the people who should have protected her. That shame belongs to them, not to her, never to her. For the next 2 years, Mirabelle lived a double life. On the outside, she was a high school junior, then a senior. She went to prom. She applied to colleges. She got a part-time job at a coffee shop 3 blocks from her house, where she learned to make a perfect latte and smiled at strangers all day long and was very, very good at pretending to be fine. On the inside, she was barely surviving. The family gatherings kept happening. Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, every single one of them, Adam and Grimes were there. And every single one of them, Mirabelle had to find a way to be in the same room as the people who had destroyed her sense of safety, while her parents laughed beside her, and her cousins ran around her feet, and her grandmother brought out the same pie she brought out every year, and everybody said the same things, and played the same games, and told the same stories. She would count the hours, from the moment she arrived to the moment she could leave. She would find seats near her mother. She would offer to help clean up early so she had an excuse to be in the kitchen instead of in the living room. She would go to the bathroom and stand there for 10 minutes just to breathe, just to be alone in a room with a locked door. The sleepless nights became a constant companion. She would lie in bed and stare at the ceiling and run through every possible scenario. What if she told her mother? Her mother loved those brothers, had grown up with them. What would it do to her to find out? What if her mother didn't believe her? What if she did believe her and it tore the entire family apart and everybody blamed Mirabelle? What if she told her father? What if he went after them and ended up in prison? What if she went to the police and nobody believed a teenage girl over 2 grown men who had no record, no complaints, and the love of an entire community? She wanted to tell someone. God, she wanted to tell someone. But who would believe her? Who would choose her over the men they had known for 40 years? Who would look at her uncles, charming, beloved, generous Adam and Grimes, and choose to believe that they were capable of this? This is one of the most devastating realities of abuse within families. The very things that made the grooming possible, the love, the trust, the long history, the community standing, become the exact obstacles that prevent the truth from coming out. The survivor doesn't just have to find the courage to speak. They have to find the courage to potentially blow up the entire world that the people they love have built. And that is an unbearable weight to place on anyone, but especially on a child, especially on a teenager who was already drowning. Mirabelle graduated high school in June of 2017. She got into a university in Cleveland, far enough from Columbus to breathe, close enough that her parents could visit. She packed her room into boxes in the same house where she had grown up, where holidays had happened, where these 2 men had sat across from her countless times. She loaded the boxes into her father's truck, and she cried the whole way to Cleveland. Not from sadness about leaving, but from something that felt dangerously close to relief. Because for the first time in 2 years, she was going to be somewhere they weren't. University changed Mirabelle in ways she hadn't anticipated. Not dramatically, not in the movie version of transformation, where someone arrives somewhere new and everything is healed. It was slower than that, quieter. She joined a student wellness group in her second semester, not because she intended to talk about anything, but because the counselor who ran the group had a poster on her office door that said, "You are allowed to take up space." And something about those words made her stop and read them 3 times. In that group, she met other people who were carrying things, heavy things, things that had no good words. And for the first time in years, she was in a room where carrying something felt less like a character flaw and more like a human reality. She didn't say anything about her own story for months. She just listened. She just sat in a circle of people who were trying to figure out how to survive what had happened to them, and she let herself be one of them without having to explain herself yet.
It was in her junior year that she finally told someone. Not a counselor, not a therapist, not her parents. It was Cassie, her best friend since 5th grade, who had driven 4 hours from Columbus to spend a weekend. They were sitting in Mirabelle's apartment kitchen. It was late, nearly midnight. They had been talking for hours, the way old friends do when they finally get time alone, working their way backward through years of things they hadn't said. And somewhere in that unraveling of time, Mirabelle looked at the coffee in her hands and said, very quietly, that there was something she had never told anyone. And Cassie, who knew her well enough to recognize the weight of that sentence, put her own cup down and said, "Okay, I'm not going anywhere." What followed was 30 minutes of broken sentences, of half-starts and long pauses, of Mirabelle staring at the table because she couldn't look up, and Cassie sitting completely still across from her, not trying to fill the silence, not rushing her, just being there. Just being the thing that Mirabelle had needed for 5 years and had never had. A witness. Someone who could hold what she was saying without flinching, without making it about themselves, without immediately jumping to what to do next, just holding it, just letting it be real. When she finished talking, Cassie reached across the table and put her hand over Mirabelle's. She didn't say, "I'm so sorry." She didn't say, "Are you sure?" She didn't say anything for a long time, and then she said, "I believe you." 2 words, and Mirabelle completely fell apart. She cried in a way she had not cried since she was a child, the kind of crying that comes from so deep it almost sounds like something else, like years of compressed grief finally finding a way out. Cassie didn't let go of her hand. She didn't try to stop it or fix it. She just stayed. And in the morning, when Mirabelle had no more tears left and was sitting on her couch wrapped in a blanket, Cassie asked her very carefully what she wanted to do. Not what Cassie thought she should do, what Mirabelle wanted. Mirabelle said she wanted to tell her parents. She said she wanted to go to the police. She said she was terrified of both of those things. But she said she was more terrified of doing nothing, of going to another Christmas dinner, of watching her uncles hold her little cousins, of spending one more day pretending that what happened to her was a secret she had agreed to keep. She called her mother the next morning. That call lasted 2 hours, and it changed everything. Within 48 hours, the police were involved. Now I need to ask you something directly. If you had been Cassie, if your best friend of 10 years sat across from you and told you something like this, what would you have done? Would you have known what to say? Would you have been able to just stay? Because one of the most important things any of us can do for someone who is carrying something this heavy is exactly what Cassie did. Not fix it, not judge it, not question it. Just believe it. Just stay. Diane Whitfield heard her daughter's voice on the phone and knew immediately that something was wrong, in the way that mothers sometimes do. Before Mirabelle had said anything specific, Diane had already sat down, because her daughter's voice sounded like a woman holding herself very carefully together. Like something inside her was made of glass, and she was walking very, very slowly. The call was devastating for Diane in a way that is almost impossible to put into words, because she wasn't just hearing that her daughter had been hurt. She was hearing that her daughter had been hurt by her brothers, men she had grown up with, men she had trusted completely, men she had brought into her home, into her family, into her daughter's life, believing with everything she had that they were safe. She believed Mirabelle. Immediately, without hesitation, and that is not nothing. That is not a small thing, because it could have gone differently, and in so many cases like this one, it does go differently. Robert, Mirabelle's father, had a reaction that was harder to contain. He went very quiet on the phone when Diane told him, the kind of quiet that has a temperature, and then he said he needed to make some calls. Diane had to spend 2 hours talking him back from driving to his brothers-in-law's houses that night, because Robert was a man who loved his daughter with every atom of his body, and what he had just been told had activated something in him that was beyond anger, beyond words. It took everything he had to channel that into the legal process instead of something else. The news spread through the family quickly, faster than anyone had anticipated. Within days, the Whitfield family, which had celebrated every holiday together for 30 years, which had photographs from every Christmas and every 4th of July, which had been the kind of family that other families looked at and envied, had fractured straight down the middle. Some believed Mirabelle. Some didn't. And the ones who didn't said things that she would carry for years. Her paternal aunt, a woman she had known her entire life, a woman who was at her birth, who braided her hair when she was 4, called Diane and said, "I don't believe it. Adam and Grimes would never. Mirabelle is confused. She's always been dramatic. Maybe she misinterpreted something." And Diane, who had been awake for 36 hours by that point and was running on grief and rage and love, had to sit there on the phone and listen to someone dismiss her daughter's pain as a misunderstanding. 3 more relatives reached out to Adam and Grimes directly before the police had even formally spoken to them. One of them warned them, let them know what Mirabelle had said, gave them time that investigators would later note with significant frustration, to align their stories, because that is what happens when a survivor finally speaks and the family chooses the accused over the victim. The family becomes, whether they intend to or not, part of the protection of the wrong people. Blood was supposed to protect Mirabelle. Instead, some of it protected them. On social media, it got worse. Someone in the extended family made a vague post about false accusations destroying good men. It got 37 likes from people Mirabelle had known her whole life, people who had watched her grow up, people who had eaten at her parents' table. She saw the post from her apartment in Cleveland and felt something she hadn't expected. Not sadness, not even hurt, just a cold, clarifying certainty. This is why I didn't tell anyone for 5 years. This is exactly why.
I think we're going to stop here, right? Because this video is over 30 minutes already, and we want to make our videos 30 minutes. We're going to unravel the court case in the part 2 of this story. If this story gets the shares and views it's supposed, the next video I'll be uploading will be the court battle, right? The justice and everything. Do you think Mirabelle got justice? What do you think was the verdict? Anyways, stay tuned, subscribe, share this video, drop a comment, right? Let's create this awareness together. Do this.